I never heard of Jinkei Bunny before December 3rd, 2023. Now, Jinkei is, according to their own website, a Japanese illustrator, and their work is, to put it mildly, breathtaking. You know, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of the old artwork of Yoshitaka Amano, the artist who brought to life Final Fantasy and Vampire Hunter D, and I think it's the flowing hair and the clothing style, but I also think we draw connections to artists that we admire. Maybe others did the same for the other artists they liked growing up, like Taikubo or Koto Hirano. Maybe that's what drew people to their art, I'm not entirely sure. Now, I first heard about them thanks to a Twitter post on November 30th, where Jinkei explained why they chose to embrace diversity in their art by drawing a black character.
To put it simply, I started creating black characters because a black fan once said to me, "Thank you for creating black characters beautifully." It's a simple reason, but those words really made me happy. A foreign fan told me, Japanese anime art and entertainment are racially discriminatory. As a Japanese illustrator, I had never heard such an opinion from Japanese people. This perspective was new to me.
Now, they received pushback from other Japanese creators for doing this, but justified their decision by stating, quite simply,
no matter how much they claim that Japanese entertainment is just for Japan, the internet has erased borders. Japanese art and entertainment are no longer just for Japanese consumers.
Now, I'm happy to report that most of the comments were positive, but I also don't think I need to tell you that there was immediate backlash. But the loudest backlash, at least the loudest I could see on the English-speaking web, didn't come from other Japanese creators, but rather from Americans who decided to speak for Japan. Posts, one after the other, criticized Jinkei for choosing to make a black character. And I think this response just sums up the whole thing.
The moment you use your art as a vessel for your agenda, you cease to be an artist and become an ideologue. You should be ashamed.
I don't need to tell you this, but this isn't the first time people have been angry at a Japanese creator for making a black character. We saw Pokemon receive similar backlash. A mod was made to whitewash Nessa from Pokemon Sword and Shield. There is a profound resistance to diversity in Japanese media from Western fans. But when you point out the hypocrisy, they'll always have posts from individuals on 2chan ready to prove, no, really, I'm just saying what the Japanese think. Those 5 posts reflect the opinions of a nation of 100 million people. Yeah, sure, buddy. But what made this line that I just showed you particularly funny to me is that same weekend, Godzilla Minus One came out. And the same sorts of folks who hated a Japanese artist for daring to draw a black character poured love over a film they believed didn't have a message. But this isn't anything new. The culture war has always focused on Japanese media, be it anime, games, movies, or literature. And this isn't just a conservative thing, by the way. Liberals and leftists do it too. Hyperfixate on Japanese media. And all I want to do with this video essay is to figure out why. Talking heads online heap praise on Japanese things by virtue of not being American, even if, they're doing the same basic thing. But there's got to be a reason, right? As of this writing, Japan has put out 33 Godzilla films. America, on the other hand, has put out 4, with the 5th, Godzilla x Kong, coming out in the near future. Now, many people argue that Godzilla is the first film where a gigantic reptilian monster attacks a city, and those people are wrong. America beat Japan to their own game. You see, Godzilla came out in Japan in 1954, but the year prior, 1953, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms came out, and that had Ray Harryhausen's incredible stop-motion animation. Now, to make things even more interesting, that film, it's based on a 1951 short story by Ray Bradbury called The Lighthouse. Of course, if we're talking about the origins of kaiju, we gotta talk about King Kong. 1933, that first film came out, followed by a sequel shortly after. And Japan actually tried to remake King Kong, and a couple of films that are now considered lost. Let's focus on Godzilla for right now. All the Godzilla films have very strong themes. Ignoring the original, which is very obviously an allegory for World War II and nuclear weapons, you got Shin Godzilla, made by Evangelion's very own Hideaki Anno, which tackles the Japanese government's failure of a response to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which resulted in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. Then there's Godzilla vs. Hedorah, which deals with environmentalism and pollution. Mothra vs. Godzilla and many of the Mothra films touch upon the impact nuclear war and human progress has on the safety of the planet at large and ecosystems that may fall outside their viewpoint. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all-out attack, prove that long Japanese titles are not a trait unique to light novels, touches upon the effects of ignoring history. And Godzilla vs. Megalon deals with, Jet Jaguar. One of the best characters in Godzilla history. Don't at me for that one. With all that being said, where does that leave Godzilla Minus One? Well, that film is a pretty heavy film. It deals with the impact of Western colonialism, Japan's inability to help its civilians after this great disaster, the trauma of war, and arguably most importantly, a people's ability to rally collectively in the face of an unstoppable force. They don't wait for others to help them because the only one there is one another. And that, in the face of adversity, is a powerful message. The point is, though, that Godzilla films are not without their messages. All of these films have an agenda in being made, whether it's to entertain or to inform. As is the case with any successful film, Godzilla Minus One has brought a lot of new fans to the fold. And while some are eager to just digest Godzilla history and get involved with the whole history of this beloved character, a lot of them have started to trash the upcoming American Godzilla film, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. They're upset that Godzilla is running, even though Godzilla has historically done things like blow himself across a field with his atomic breath or drop kick someone by defying gravity itself. But you'd know this if you watch the films. A few posts I've even seen say that they're concerned that Godzilla is becoming like the MCU. And these fears of the MCUification of Godzilla are pretty unfounded, considering he's been teaming up with other monsters since 1965. From this you can draw two conclusions. One being, these people have no idea what Godzilla is about and just have to learn, which is the optimistic answer. But the other option, and the one I find more interesting to discuss, is that the only way they know how to talk about Godzilla is by drawing a connection to Disney. Because when it comes down to it, a lot of folks love Godzilla right now for one reason, especially in the culture war. It's doing better than Disney. Of all the things to criticize the Disney Corporation for, and there's many things, its exploitation of VFX workers, its lip service to minority groups, its enforcement of a company voice that squashes creativity, Godzilla turning a higher profit than the Marvels, and yes, I said higher profit, not higher gross, is a really weird thing to do, especially considering these folks don't seem to know anything about Godzilla. To them, Godzilla is interchangeable with anything else. It's just thing from Japan to them. And that's evident from the fact they don't know anything about Godzilla lore. They don't seem to have any interest in Godzilla's history. And honestly, that diminishes the merits of Godzilla Minus One. It shows they don't really care about the media and what it represents. That they don't care about the message, they don't care about the effects, the acting, the writing. Just what it serves in their greater culture war against Disney. And we can tell this because this narrative has happened before. In 2019, Captain Marvel came out, and a lot of culture warriors pitted it against Alita Battle Angel, the live-action adaptation of the anime Battle Angel Alita. Alita was how you did a cool, powerful female lead, whereas Captain Marvel was feminist and woke, and the agenda, and da-da-da-da. But what's ironic about all this is that between the two films, Alita is the far more leftist progressive film. I mean, Captain Marvel was funded by the US military. On the other hand, however, Alita Battle Angel focuses on a character who is pulled out of a trash dump, left behind by a bunch of rich people floating in the sky. The super rich in Alita profit off of the bodies of those they exploit, in many ways, as we see across the course of the film. That's pretty leftist of a message, indicating that the rich consume the poor, both body and soul, and then dump whatever remains in the trash. That is not to say that Captain Marvel is inherently a conservative right movie necessarily. It does focus on a population of displaced people and trying to find a home for them, but it is definitely more aligned with centrist or right-leaning views than the more liberal, more leftist Alita. But themes don't seem to really matter in the culture war. The fact that Captain Marvel ironically aligns more with many culture warriors' conservative views doesn't matter. The fact that Alita runs completely counter to a lot of their viewpoints doesn't matter. What matters is that Brie Larson wanted more diversity in the critical landscape. The film itself that she was a part of doesn't really matter at all. That makes Captain Marvel, which again is a somewhat politically conservative film, the enemy, and by extension, the studio that released it, Disney, the enemy. And that continues to this very day. So when we see tweets from people who claim that Godzilla doesn't have a message, we need to appreciate these messages for what they're actually saying. These folks don't care about politics in how the state is run, or the dichotomy between the rich and the poor. They are not talking about the have and have-nots. They're talking about whether or not women, black people, and gay people are visible in their media.
None of these elements of reality last forever.
If you've been on YouTube before, you've seen those pages, the ones that obsess over Brie Larson, saying we need more diversity among our film critics, or complaining about the female Ghostbusters film, almost a decade after it's come out. These media critics feel legacy cinema is under attack and needs us to protect it, which I think leads into why I feel they're so fanatic about Japanese media despite seemingly having little actual interest in it. I don't think it's useful to ask, is anime conservative? Because it's a medium. Obviously, tons of anime are conservative, and tons aren't. And they are really good anime that are conservative too, I might add. Death Note, for example, is a pretty conservative series, with a very black and white moral code. But the quality of writing is so consistent and good, at least until the second half, that most people don't care. But no one will take you seriously if you argued, say, Sailor Moon is conservative. And the anime Dirty Pair, well...
やめてよパパ過去の話なんかどうだっていい今のジョアンカは立派な女性だ
いくら手術を受け体が女であっても断じてお前たちの仲を許すわけにはいかん
だからどうしたっていうのよ頭古いんじゃないの今や10人に1人は展開手術を受けている時代なのにあんたの秘書よりマシだよあんなことを
In a single sentence, why do I think culture warriors love Japan? It's not America. Conservative belief boils down to one concept. The world was better in the past. They value the simple time when things were better for them. Two issues with that. Just because things were better for you didn't mean they're better for everyone else. And things, inevitably, will change. Your knowledge of the world changes as you learn things. You can never go back to the simplicity of childhood because you now know things. Because of the algorithm online, you're fed things that match your interests. So if you like one anime, you'll get more like it. And inevitably, you will think the whole medium reflects that which you see. So if you watch a lot of harem or isekai shows, you're naturally going to assume all anime is like this, and thus all of Japan loves the same thing that you love. And so, if you want to protect Japan from any outside influences so it doesn't change, you're naturally going to attack anything that is unlike the thing you like. You want to control Japan to save it from becoming like modern America. Which is why so often I think culture warriors idolize Japanese nationalists, who, like other fascists, want to bring Japan to its former glory, and that means stamping out the imprint of the West. Of course, the average American doesn't really know what that entails. So right now, let's try to figure out something. Why do conservatives project themselves onto Japan? And why are they wrong? Culture warriors hate this new trend of diversity, quote unquote. This is why they insist a country entirely unlike the one they're from is somehow a haven from said diversity. And in fairness, they're not without merit entirely. So let's talk about the LDP and Ken Akamatsu. Ken Akamatsu is the creator of manga like Love Hina and Negima. Two manga which I personally am iffy on. Like, I grew up with them, but Love Hina especially I feel aged really badly. I actually wrote a whole article about it a few years back. I can link it in the description below. However, a lot of culture warriors love Akamatsu for a very particular reason. In 2011, Akamatsu took a stand against new copyright laws that would be passed under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Specifically, he feared that new laws might impact doujin, fan comics. A lot of your favorite manga creators from Clamp to Koto Hirano got their start with doujin. This jump-started a political career for Akamatsu in the Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP. In 2022, Akamatsu became a legislator on the 26th House of Councilors. Now, so far, doesn't seem like a big deal, right? A manga creator becomes a politician, fighting against censorship. Why would I oppose something like that? Well, I wouldn't. I will never side with politicians saying we have to crack down on fanfiction or something like that. However, some of Akamatsu's other positions drew significant criticism, both from within Japan and without Japan. Now, folks probably in the West would hear the term liberal Democrats and think that the LDP is like the American Democratic Party. But the reality is that the LDP is a conservative party. It was formed when two separate conservative parties in 1955 formed a unified front against the Japanese Socialist Party. There are multiple factions within the LDP that range from mildly conservative to straight-up ethno-nationalist. Oh, and by the way, in case you were keeping track, this is the party that was in control of Japan during the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. The governor of Tokyo at the time, Shintaro Ishihara, was a former member of the LDP. And he made the claim that the tsunami was divine punishment against Japan. He didn't get elected next year. I can't imagine why. So the year after this catastrophic disaster, Akamatsu and the majority of the LDP protested an amendment to... Okay, there's no way I can discuss this without YouTube demonetizing me. Japan amended their cheese pizza laws. Akamatsu criticized the amendment, saying that it didn't distinguish between authentic cheese pizza and fake cheese pizza. The amendment was adjusted and later passed, with distinctions being established. You know what I'm saying when I say cheese pizza, right? After this, multiple laws were proposed to limit the sale of fake cheese pizza in Japan, and the LDP would beat them down every time. Several noteworthy members celebrated their victories over these laws by posing with all the fake cheese pizza that they bought. Okay, look, here's the thing. I personally don't care what art a person consumes, so long as it isn't hurting anyone. But if you throw a cheese pizza in my face, I'm just going to have to say, what the fuck? But now the LDP is just trolling everyone. And it worked. It got a ton of attention, which they were then able to leverage for their success. And a lot of conservative trolls in America noticed. Akamatsu's work and political actions have been criticized by groups such as the Global Gender Equality Organization, UN Women. Now, Akamatsu in response claimed that external pressure was being pushed to regulate Japan's freedom of expression, especially for manga, anime, and games. He argued that outside parties should not regulate a publication and distribution industry. Now, notably, he indicates that outside parties didn't simply refer to organizations outside of Japan. After all, the policies that he was fighting were proposed from within the Japanese government. Other politicians in Japan wanted this content regulated that Akamatsu disagreed with. Akamatsu clearly wanted to draw a connection between his political adversaries and forces outside of Japan. This is a tactic we see a lot in Western conservative groups as well, that their enemy are under the thumb of a billionaire like George Soros, or another country like some communist country. Now, Akamatsu and the LDP had that on their side, only now Western trolls started to echo Akamatsu and the LDP's sentiment. Criticize an anime? You're a Westerner who wants to censor anime. Of course. This only applied, by the way, to people who didn't like certain titles. If you were Japanese and made something that the LDP or American trolls didn't like, they'd criticize you to the end of the world and back. Just like with Jinkei.
Am I correct in assuming that you're what they call gay?
Now look, obviously I'm not a Japanese person. I don't live there, I haven't traveled there. I'm not going to pretend to have an insight into their history. All I plan on doing is citing events and quoting the people who know more than me. At least, in regards to their history. Japan experienced a great isolationist period until Commodore Perry forced Japan's ports open, which meant that their culture was completely isolated for a very long time, without any contact from anyone else. Supposedly. Now, it's no secret that Japan is a more conservative country than most. While same-sex activity was only briefly criminalized between 1872 and 1881, the country remains the only G7 nation that does not accept any form of same-sex unions. Not marriage, not a civil partnership, nothing. What the Japanese government wants is not what the Japanese people necessarily want, though. And that's something a lot of people have to understand. That would be as foolish as looking at the revocation of Roe v. Wade and implying that all Americans align with that decision. Japanese media, such as Godzilla, constantly criticizes the Japanese government for some of its decisions. To make matters even more complicated, prefectures don't always align with the Japanese government's position. It's well known that for a long time the age of consent in Japan was 13, but just about every other prefecture in Japan had a different age of consent. This is partially why, in 2023, Japan raised the age of consent nationally to 16 to match the lowest age of consent in the various prefectures of Japan. Now, the Japanese parliament passed another law in 2023, independent of the age of consent thing, regarding LGBTQA rights and issues. They passed a resolution to raise awareness on the subject, and activists in Japan were justifiably frustrated about this, especially after the Japanese government's inability to protect the rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer citizens. Now, there have been multiple rulings back and forth in Japan over whether or not same-sex unions are constitutional or not. As of this writing, the most recent update comes in September 2023. It was ruled that the ban on same-sex marriage is indeed unconstitutional. It's also important to note that several political parties in Japan want same-sex marriage legalized. The only major outlier is, again, the LDP. Recently, another major battle for LGBTQA rights in Japan was fought, but not through politics, but rather through media. And I think this is a perfect encapsulation of the fear that the right feels when it comes to Japan, and why they're so fiercely protective of Japanese media. Kadokawa, one of Japan's biggest publishers, recently announced plans to release a translation of Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier. The book is an extremely controversial trans-exclusionary feminist text that has caused massive discourse upon its release in the West. It criticizes the use of gender affirmation, using exaggerated, often highly misleading anecdotes to justify its thesis. So naturally, several Western TERFs were eager for Japan to publish and distribute this text. However, the backlash to Kadokawa's announcement was so immediate and so intense that the publisher dropped all interest in the book days after announcing it. Now, a few important distinctions. One, this is not censorship. The book can still be bought in Japan, but in English, not in Japanese. This is the cancellation of a translation of the book, not plans to ban distribution entirely. Two, anyone arguing that the West pressured Kadokawa into dropping the transphobic book is wrong. Kadokawa only announced publication of the book in Japanese. The response came from Japan. Protests outside Kadokawa's building were organized by Japanese LGBTQA activists. Publishing professionals from within Japan sent open letters urging Kadokawa to pull the book. And it worked. They folded the public outcry before the scheduled protests even occurred. I think people don't realize just how significant the LGBTQA organization is in Japan. This past April, over 200,000 people showed up for Tokyo Rainbow Pride, which many of the participants were younger. Tokyo Rainbow Pride, in particular, is one of the largest pro-LGBTQA events in all of Asia. A poll conducted by Kyodo News showed that 64% of the Japanese public is in favor of recognizing same-sex marriage. A different poll conducted in 2023 found 72% of voters supported legalizing gay marriage, up from 2021's 65% and 2015's 41%. Now, while this is not a poll on trans rights, it's clear from this that the prevailing opinions on LGBTQA rights are shifting in Japan, in reflection to the rest of the world. So yeah, it shouldn't be a shock this really sparked protest. The surprising thing is that the protest worked so quickly. Though I do find it funny, culture warriors often argue they want to protect Japan from Western imperialism. So they're mad that Japan isn't releasing a book written by an American writer? Interesting. Oh, and Abigail Schreier's response to Kadokawa canceling her book was to, quote-unquote, teach Japan how to deal with censorious crybullies, which sounds pretty patronizing, not gonna lie. For a group of people who celebrate how Japan is a haven from Western ideology, they sure do want to force Western ideas onto Japan, whether they want it or not. What's the word for that? Hypocritical? That seems the right word, right? Oh, also, the book claims that anime makes you trans because she thinks anime is CG furry art. No, really, read it. Do you really think it's so weird Japan didn't want this book published? Now, I want to pause and redirect this a little bit. This period of anti-LGBTQ policy can be traced to the Meiji Restoration, when Japan tried to be more Western-like. Modernized. But what was Japan like before the Meiji Restoration? This may shock you, but prior to the Meiji Restoration, there is very little indication of institutionalized homophobia. Japanese Shintoism was principally concerned with proprietary rites and rituals. Its mythology fostered nationalism through the cult of divine emperors, but it had no special code of morals, and seems to have regarded sex as a natural phenomenon, to be enjoyed with few inhibitions. Phallic shrines dotted the countryside. Early law codes penalized incest and bestiality, but not homosexual relations. The god of the Shinto pantheon were themselves highly sexual. In later times, some came to be seen as guardian deities of male love. Homosexuality is also widespread in pre-Meiji works from Japan, though a majority of it remains untranslated. Ihara Saikaku's 1682 work, Amorous Men, features an explicitly bisexual lead. Yoede Akinari creates fictionalized tales based on sordid stories about Buddhist monks. Even the classics, like The Tale of Genji, clearly features explicitly queer characters.
Genji alone lay plunged in the blackest melancholy. But even while he was raging at the inhuman stubbornness of her newfound and incomprehensible resolve, he found that he could not but admire her the more for this invincible tenacity. At last, he grew tired of lying awake. There was no more to be done. A moment later, he had changed his mind again, and suddenly whispered to the boy, "Take me to where she is hiding." "It is too difficult," he said. "She is locked in, and there are so many people there. I am afraid to go with you." "So be it," said Genji. "But you, at least, must not abandon me." And he laid the boy beside him on his bed. He was well content to find himself lying by this handsome young prince's side, and Genji, we must record, found the boy no bad substitute for his ungracious sister. Ho ho ho, damn! Genji a hoe! He a fucking hoe! Oh, beautiful. 10 out of 10. This is like trashy reality TV drama, and I am here for it.
and there's a great deal of art and historical accounts celebrating both homosexual and homosocial relationships in Japan. Arguably, this is best exemplified in Ihara Saikaku's 1687 collection of stories, The Great Mirror of Male Love. Even after the Meiji Restoration, LGBTQA fiction was prolific in Japan. 1919 saw the publication of Nobuko Yashia's Two Virgins in the Attic. This book, marketed towards young women, became the basis for the Class S genre of literature. This genre would center on romantic friendships between teenage girls, who often attended all-girls schools. Class S fiction as a whole saw a resurgence in the 90s with the publication of Marisama ga Mitaru, a light novel series that would later be adapted into an anime. Class S literature would go on to heavily impact queer fiction in Japan for decades to come, most notably in yuri, manga, and anime. In an article for Anime Herald, Erica Friedman writes,
Yanere no Nishoujo established many of the tropes we see in manga and literature for girls in Japan, and a lot of the characterizations and settings we now understand as yuri. When we look back at the themes of intense emotional relationships and same-sex desire we see in her work, we recognize them as a foundation for what we now call the yuri genre.
Japan as a culture is not as politically unified as one might believe just from watching YouTube videos, but they're still primarily homogenous in terms of population. So that means, what? That Japan is a purely Japanese culture? A lot of right-wing spheres idolize a pure culture. A big talking point in right-wing is the opposition of immigrants. And so by that standard, Japan looks like it might be the ideal for that belief. Sure, a huge reason for Japan's isolationist period is because of a Christian cult that seized the castle in the early 1600s, but modern Japan's borders aren't exactly open. Famously, Japan has restricted the number of refugees allowed entry in Japan. But that's gradually beginning to change. Earlier this year, it made headlines that 3 million foreigners lived in Japan, an 11.4% increase from the year prior. According to Japan's Immigration Services Agency, more people born outside Japan are living in Japan than ever before in the country's history. Furthermore, Japan's reformations to their refugee program means that the number of refugees granted asylum has nearly doubled this year. But before all of that, who were immigrating to Japan? If you believe right-wingers online, probably a bunch of Western anime fans and not many people of color. Let's analyze that for a second. In 2000, the Japanese Statistics Bureau took a census of how many citizens of Japan either immigrated to the country or could trace their lineage to a country other than Japan. They found that 2.3% of the population came from outside the country. The top 5, China, Korea, both North and South, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Brazil. To quote the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs website,
The Brazilian community in Japan is the third largest Brazilian community abroad, despite having decreased from its peak of over 300,000 people in 2007 to just over 173,000 today. The Japanese descendant community, Nikkei, in Brazil, the result of immigration started in 1908, reaches about 1.6 million, the largest Japanese population outside Japan. This human bond is the main asset of relations, enhancing dialogue and cooperation between the two countries.
Reality is this: Japanese culture isn't made in a vacuum. It's been influenced for decades by Western media. Osamu Tezuka cited Disney animation as a core influence. Works like Godzilla personified cultural fears into titanic monsters. Final Fantasy could not have existed without Dungeons and Dragons. But arguably, one of the most important filmmakers to be influenced by the West is Akira Kurosawa, who in turn inspired most of the media culture warriors to this day are fighting over. And Kurosawa drew influence from Western literature.
It's a tale told by an idiot.
From an early age, the West influenced Kurosawa. Kurosawa's father loved film, baseball, and swimming. In fact, Kurosawa's father founded one of the first baseball teams in Japan, long before Japan became the only country outside of America to love that sport, where you hit the ball and stand in place for a long time. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Kurosawa's family came from aristocracy, a line can be drawn between Akira Kurosawa and the legendary samurai Abe Sadato. In Kurosawa's words,
I began to love to read books, especially Dostoevsky, and I can remember when we went to see Abel Gance's La Rue, and it was the first film that really influenced me and made me think of wanting to become a filmmaker.
Even Japan's traditionalists enjoyed some Western media. Emperor Hirohito was apparently such a big fan of Columbo that the first Western celebrity he tried to meet was Peter Falk.
The boys at the lab finally got a fix on that poison the killer used. It was Japanese blowfish poison.
So Kurosawa admiring Western storytelling isn't in itself remarkable. What is remarkable, however, is how his films influenced Western storytelling, and how he adapted Western stories into distinctly Japanese stories. Akira Kurosawa directed 31 films in his lifetime. A bunch of them were remade into cowboy films. Hell, the Western as we know it would not exist without Kurosawa. Nor would Star Wars, considering George Lucas basically put Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress into a blender with Flash Gordon and Dune to make his sci-fi classic. Every story you grew up with owes a debt of gratitude to Kurosawa. Yes, especially the ones culture warriors adore. Kurosawa's work has been subject to remixing for years. But what a lot of people don't realize is how many of Kurosawa's films did the same thing to Western works. Now that's not to say that Kurosawa owes his success to the West. The man is a brilliant director. But to say his films weren't inspired by Western media is short-sighted. Kurosawa's Ikiru was inspired by Leo Tolstoy's 1866 novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And I admit I'm not super familiar with this novella, and thus I'm probably the worst person to explain where Kurosawa drew from the novel and how he diverged from it. But I do know Shakespeare, and Kurosawa based 3 of his films on Shakespeare: Throne of Blood, The Bad Sleep Well, and Ron, which adapted Macbeth, Hamlet, and King Lear respectively. All 3 are masterpieces that take Shakespeare's characters and plot structure, but apply them to distinctly Japanese imagery and culture. Throne of Blood replaces witches with spirits, soldiers with samurai, Scotland for feudal Japan. None of this is to say that Kurosawa didn't draw from Japanese literature. His first film, Samshiro Sugata, is an adaptation of a novel written by Tsuneo Tomita. In his time, Japanese critics argued Kurosawa was too westernized, that his media didn't appeal to Japanese sensibilities. On a superficial level, it might be hard to fathom this, given Kurosawa's reputation today. After all, most of his iconic films are historical epics set in Japan's history. Critic Joan Mellon cited Japanese director Nagisha Oshima, a left-wing figure who had a violent reaction to Kurosawa. As Mellon put it in the British Film Institute's essay on Seven Samurai, Oshima felt that Kurosawa had brought Japanese film to a Western audience, which meant to Oshima that he must be pandering to Western values and politics. Kurosawa had a response, as cited in his New York Times obituary.
I collect old Japanese lacquerware, as well as antique French and Dutch glassware. In short, the Western and the Japanese live side by side in my mind naturally, without the least bit of conflict.
Another critic of Kurosawa was Shintaro Ishihara. You know, the former Tokyo governor? That one? In 1990, he was interviewed by Playboy, where he said that, "If I had remained a movie director, I can assure you that I would have at least become a better one than Akira Kurosawa." Why did people elect this guy? Seriously. Western conservatives seem to see Japan as a place that produces media they love, and they assume that the country must celebrate this sort of media too. But Kurosawa was the core influence behind the media that these same Western culture warriors love, and was in his time rejected. If you're watching this and you think Japan is somehow a sanctuary for your ideas, look, it's not. It's a country with history you don't understand. And you won't understand it no matter how many times you play Dynasty Warriors or whatever. And look, this isn't a Hayao Miyazaki thinks otaku or subhuman tract here. It's just that the media that you see isn't even a fraction of the art that comes out of this country. It's just the stuff designed with international audiences in mind. Kurosawa knew that media could cross boundaries beyond nations, So he made films understanding audiences both inside and outside his country. Inside and outside his country. Where did I hear that one before? Oh yeah, right, Jinkei. Oh yeah, it's all coming together now. Japanese art is increasingly made with an international audience in mind. But a lot of Western culture warriors will argue that this is the problem. They will say that it's bad that Japan is making art for people who aren't Japanese, which is fairly ironic considering that they wouldn't exactly respond well to art that does not have their intentions in mind, and do not respond well to art that does not have their intentions in mind. So what about art from Japan, made for the Japanese, that doesn't align with culture warriors' views?
The only one who can take care of you and understand you is you.
Most culture warriors, when they see Japanese media with LGBTQA characters, assume that the media must be pandering to audiences outside of Japan. But that's not always the case. Yuri on Ice was a fairly popular anime that presented a world where bigotry doesn't seem to exist. Now, while some might criticize that for being a little too optimistic, there is something beautiful about this fantasy of a world where racism, homophobia, and gender conformity just isn't a thing that anyone cares about. I mean, the show isn't without flaws. I mean, there's a lot of fat phobia, like there's a lot of body shaming in it. But still, and the show was popular in Japan. But the Culture Warriors told us, Japan panders when they include LGBTQA characters, right? You see, I just find all of this so strange because growing up, anime was the sort of thing conservatives hated. I remember reading posts about parents fearing anime would lure their kids into the occult. You know, like Dungeons and Dragons or heavy metal. Fears grounded in reality, not just conservative paranoia.
That's kind of far out.
Mazes and monsters is a far-out game.
Hey, it's all imagination.
Is it?
Just look at the early Sailor Moon fandom. In an era where American media was so conservative that women holding hands was taboo, Sailor Moon had multiple queer characters, and even a few gender-fluid or non-binary characters. It's just bizarre to me. When I'm in Love with the Villainess came out, I saw people online throwing fits because their wholesome Yuri anime had gotten gay because they frankly discuss gay identity. No one who read the light novel I'm in Love with the Villainess was surprised when the anime had this scene. So why were so many culture warriors surprised by this? It's a faithful adaptation of a book written in Japan for Japanese audiences. But I think it's interesting when conservatives believe that something they like is being stolen from them. Now, I don't think these conservatives would act betrayed knowing that, say, Yuri Katsuki from Yuri on Ice or Haruka Tenno from Sailor Moon aren't cis or straight. I mean, like, look at them. Just look at them. Obviously, but a character they like, well, that's theirs. They have ownership over it, so they feel it's stolen from them if something changes. They don't care who steals it, it's theirs. When Zombieland Saga first came out, fans went ballistic when Lily, a central character, turned out to be trans. And at first, fans thought this must be some mistranslation. Surely Japan would never put a trans character in their series. Surely a country where it was illegal to be in the same-sex union would never make a canon trans. Lily was trans. In an interview with Zombieland Saga's writer and producer, Shigeru Murakoshi and Nobuhiro Takenaka, Murakoshi explains, "We discussed things as a team and worked very hard to include scenes like the one of pre-zombie Lily living with her father, and how they came to an understanding of one another. But at the same time, once Lily became a zombie, personal differences don't matter to the other members, whether it was someone like Tay or Lily, who was born a boy. But none of that matters to the members. Of course, everyone has their unique background and personality, but after such an absurd thing as becoming zombies, everyone is unfazed by other things and readily accepts whatever differences each other might have. They see past everything and don't make a big deal of it." Lily being trans was ultimately done to make her stand out as a character, to give her something unique. But at the end of the day, Lily was Lily, a self-actualized character who existed. Her identity is incidental. It's often harder for people to grasp how a character can come out after being in the closet for so long. Some fans have a hard time accepting to this day that Bridget from Guilty Gear was trans, especially considering her fairly messy journey to coming to terms with her identity. However, what a lot of people might not realize or understand is that in real life, people sometimes take a while to figure themselves out. And art can be a good means to help people come to terms with that, and a good reflection of this process. And very late addition to this part of the script, Hideo Kojima recently announced his newest game, OD, will star trans actor Hunter Schafer. After OD's announcement at the Game Awards, Kojima posted a picture of himself with Hunter and Udo Kier wearing a shirt reading, "Body is reality." Some people started interpreting what this could mean. And anyone who has not seen David Cronenberg's Crime of the Future, it's a reference to Crime of the Future, which itself is often interpreted as a trans allegory. In fact, Cronenberg himself has used this quote in support of the trans community, citing them as being the embodiment of his film's themes regarding bodily revolution. Also, small note, Kojima's Metal Gear Solid 2, that's the first time the word bisexual was used in a video game.
So that's why they call him Vamp. No, Vamp isn't for vampire, it's because he's bisexual.
This leads me to one of the single queerest franchises to ever come out of Japan, Kingdom Hearts. Well, kind of. Utada Hikaru is most famous among Western fans as the singer who brought to life the opening and closing credits of Kingdom Hearts, as well as the rebuild of Evangelion. But Utada has had a pretty long career of J-pop hits. In an Instagram post, Utada Hikaru came out as non-binary, emphasizing how they felt profoundly uncomfortable being forced into a gendered box. Utada Hikaru is a dual citizen of both America and Japan, so some folks can probably justify ignoring Utada coming out as just an American thing. It would be wild if a noteworthy Japanese creator, maybe someone who made extremely popular manga, like say something that's like an origin point for the modern isekai genre, if they came out as non-binary, that would just be wild. Uetase is responsible for some of the most noteworthy manga of the 1990s. While she debuted in 1989, Watase's earliest claim to fame is Fushigi Yugi, a shoujo manga that inspired the entire isekai genre. Colleen's Manga Rex has an incredible video on the topic that traces modern isekai to Fushigi Yugi, so I'll link that rather than just repeat what she says verbatim. Now, there's a character in Fushigi Yugi named Noriko. Noriko is a crossdresser and gay, or possibly bi. While much of Noriko's characterization is sloppy by modern standards, it's undeniably a progressive step forward. And frankly, Noriko is such a likable character, it's hard not to like her. Or him. Them? Again, even the characters aren't sure how Noriko identifies because Noriko's identity is fluid. Uetase started Fushigi Yugi in 1991. In 2019, she came out as X-gender. Yes, Uetase prefers using she/her pronouns, but again, unlike what a lot of people will tell you, gender is more than just what pronoun you identify with. X-gender is a non-binary gender identity unique to Japan. There's no American equivalent to it. When looking at Noriko, I personally see someone creating a draft for themselves, working through their own confused feelings, and beginning to live vicariously in some ways through the character. It reminds me a lot of something that N.D. Stevenson said regarding their work, Nimona.
The themes have their roots in the comic, but it would be years before I came out as gay. Years before I came out as trans. Narratives have been my way of exploring those identities, even as allegory.
If the creation of art helped N.D. Stevenson come to discover himself, then that same thing can be true for many other people as well. And they are several people who use art as a means to explore their own personal identity. Becky Albertari, the author of Simon vs. the Homo Sapien Agenda, had a very similar experience, being a closeted bisexual woman who channeled some of her own complicated feelings through art. Watase was in her early 20s when drafting Fushigi Yugi, same as Stevenson, same stage of personal growth and development. When I read Fushigi Yugi, a work I honestly do love, I think of that quote by Stevenson. I think of Nimona, and I think of Noriko, and I think of artists early in their careers. Part of me wonders if Watase were 23 in a different era, if she might have sorted out her feelings regarding her gender identity as quickly as Stevenson did. But everyone's journey is unique, and it's presumptuous to assume that there's a right or wrong way to come out. It's one thing for me to stand up here and say that Japanese people have a right to write stories for the international audiences, and to say that that's enough. That's enough reason for them to include LGBTQA characters or black characters or what have you. But I think a lot of people keep ignoring a key thing. Japanese people can be gay, they can be bi, they can be trans, they can be non-binary. And as we saw with Brazil, a lot of Japanese people can be biracial or even Brazilian. They might have more in common with Americans than their neighbors. And they can be born and raised in Japan and have a right to speak on matters that concern Japan. They have more of a right to speak about it than some culture warrior who never has gone to Japan. Conservatives are projecting their beliefs onto Japan. If Western conservatives came to Japan, they'd find one of three things. They'd find they don't know how to function in a country whose rules and customs they don't understand. They'd find that the conservative Japanese people don't like them. And the rest of the Japanese people they'd encounter, they would hurt. Because what conservatives and culture warriors are doing, projecting their wants onto Japan, it's just another form of colonization, turning Japan into their personal safe space. I'm not foolish enough to think an entire country of different people are going to align with my worldview. And quite frankly, I don't think I'd want that. The world would be boring if everyone saw everything the same way. But I know a lot of Western culture warriors don't really care what the Japanese people think. Because we saw a bunch of them just bully an artist for not being their perfect anime fantasy.
If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I know this was my first attempt at a video essay, but after the James Summerton's drama, I figured, well, if I'm getting ripped off anyway, I might as well join YouTube and write these essays for here. I want to offer a special thank you to Kyla T, Jazzy Oliver, Chrystal Williams, and Suede for reading those quotations. In particular, Suede, he reached out first, and I really appreciate the assistance there. I also want to offer a special thank you to Pillar of Garbage, I believe. He offered some advice on Twitter that I thought was very invaluable, so thank you so much for that as well. Thanks to all the brilliant creators who created the content that I lifted for this, in terms of footage from movies, books, and comics. Thank you to the various writers and sources who I hope I credited in this video. I don't want to have anyone without their credit, so there you go. If you like this, consider subscribing or subscribing to Patreon. I admit my Patreon is very thin right now, but I hope to add more robust content as time goes on. I know this was my first attempt. I was a little under the weather while making this, so hopefully did not factor into the quality of the video, but I digress. In fact, I'm a little under the weather while recording this. I think I might have a bronchial thing. Who knows? Everyone's sick right now. Thank you so much, and if you hate watched it to this point, congratulations, I just stole an hour of your time.